Another news alert for you, and this one also close to home. Havana, Cuba, a big powwow of nations that hate us assembling not all that far from us to Steve Harrigan in the middle of it all in Havana. Hey, Steve.
Neil, as those presidential jets continue to arrive throughout the day in Havana, the man out there to meet the dignitaries is not Fidel Castro. Instead, it's his younger brother, 75-year-old Raul Castro. Fidel, of course, had to cede temporary power to his brother last month after an undisclosed ailment. So it's Raul, for the moment, in charge. And in an unusual move, some Cuban ministry officials are talking about what life could be like in a post-Fidel world. They say it's not going to be like China. There will be no explosion of capitalism here in Cuba after Fidel. Here's what Cuba's Minister of Economy had to say.
In the event that the commander-in-chief remains ill, and the issue of whether there would be a change in the policies of Cuba with the opening of the market, I could say that it will not be like that.
As the meetings continue, much of the talk is about terrorism, and one of the most important men in Cuba arrives today. That is not even a Cuban. Instead, it's Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. Chavez, of course, is helping to keep the Cuban economy afloat. He's doing it by heavily subsidizing 100,000 barrels of Venezuelan oil every day. Neil, back to you.
Steve Harrigan, thank you very much. Well, Newt Gingrich probably does not like the sound of this kind of a gathering. He's long been saying these are signs of troubling times. With us now, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. What do you think of this powwow?
Well, first of all, I think we're trapped by political correctness. If you were announcing the gathering of dictators, or the association of failed nations, or the association of predatory political bosses, it would make a lot more sense because it would be more honest. The fact is there are a number of places around the world that are dictatorships that hate America for good reason. We represent freedom. And if you're trying to impose a dictatorship on a country, we're a very bad example because we actually allow people to be free. Second, notice this economic minister. He's not going to follow China into a free market, okay, which means they will continue to keep the Cuban people among the poorest people in the Western Hemisphere. They will continue to deprive them of any kind of economic opportunity. They'll continue to keep them out of the modern world market and modern world technology. And yet this is treated, particularly by the American left and the elites, as just an acceptable, reasonable thing to say. So I think.
But don't we also accept it as noise by a bunch of kooks?
Well, but they're not kooks. They're potentially very dangerous people. Chavez has billions of dollars because of the price of oil. He's buying Russian aircraft. I wouldn't be surprised in 2 or 3 years to see him buy Iranian and North Korean missiles.
Well, Ahmadinejad is going to be going there as well. What do you make of the fact that so many of the countries and leaders that hate us are all assembling but miles off our shore?
Well, first of all, because we have failed to aggressively try to help the Cuban people achieve democracy, we have tolerated Castro now for over 40 years, almost 50 years. And as a result, you have this enclave of really almost fossilized communist dictatorship 90 miles off our shore, a perfectly natural place for dictators of the world to rally. They can all go to a fellow dictator to rally. But we also have to recognize, when you see Iran and you see Venezuela in the same place, and you realize that, for example, Hugo Chavez has appointed a pro-Hezbollah charge in Damascus, who regularly host meetings plotting against the United States, bringing together Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. There are more ties here than
So what do we do about it?
Well, I think we have to recognize that this is a worldwide threat to the United States, and I think that we have to be prepared to undertake the kind of campaign necessary to replace the dictatorship in Iran, to replace the dictatorship in North Korea. And we also shouldn't give them an inch morally. I mean, these are people who are bad people who run bad dictatorships, who exploit their own people, who very often use secret police, very often torture people, very often lock them up for many years. And we should be pretty aggressive and pretty direct in condemning them and in feeling morally comfortable condemning them.
But we've, to different degrees, tried that since the '79 Iranian Revolution, right? To little avail.
We have never, look, even to this day, it is not legal for the hostages to sue the Iranian government over their incarceration because the deal that Jimmy Carter cut blocks Americans from even getting anything back from the Iranians. We have never launched an all-out campaign in a Ronald Reagan style to replace the Iranian government. We have never helped organize the people who don't like the government. This is a government which had to kick 1,200 people off the ballot as candidates because they were too moderate. This is a government which regularly has riots at the University of Tehran. This is a government which has lots of problems which we are failing to organize an effort to replace. North Korea is even worse. It's a terrible regime that oppresses its people terribly. And my only point is we have never taken as a position what Reagan said about the Soviet Empire. When Reagan set out in 1981 to replace the Soviet Empire, and 10 years later it disappeared.
Let me ask you about the tone going into this year's midterm elections, that maybe it's the Iraq War, maybe it's just battle fatigue, whatever the case. The president's poll numbers are pretty low. Republicans are in jeopardy of losing the House, maybe even the Senate as well. So is this type of talk going to unite them, or will it just rattle more Americans?
Well, I don't know. I think that there's this indication that when you tell the American people the truth about Ahmadinejad, and they learn that he has said publicly that he thinks America can be defeated. He said publicly he thinks that it would be good to have martyrs. He has said publicly that Israel can be eliminated from the face of the earth. And you say to the average American, do you really think that we should allow him to have nuclear weapons and dominate the Persian Gulf? Overwhelmingly, they're opposed. And so part of the challenge is...
But overwhelmingly, they're opposed to going into Iran to make sure he doesn't have them.
No, that's not true. In fact, a substantial majority of Americans favor military action if necessary.
Not unilateral military action. I haven't seen a single poll that says that.
I think if you look at recent polling...
So that an overwhelming majority of Americans would back invading Iran to get nuclear weapons?
Stopping, not invading, using military action to stop them from developing nuclear weapons.
Well, that's militarily knocking them out, right?
Yes. And I think if you say the average American, if your choice was to tolerate Iran getting nuclear weapons or to do whatever it took to stop them, I suspect the average American would say to you, we cannot allow a religious fanatic who is prepared to be a martyr to have nuclear weapons when he openly says he wants to defeat the United States.
I always ask when you hear, are you running for president?
I will decide that in September of 2007.
And you wouldn't tell me anyway, would you?
I will in September of 2007.
Maybe O'Reilly.
Be glad to come back.
All right. Newt Gingrich, thank you very much.